The IMF just released a document that confirms what this community has been saying for years. And if you understand what's in that document and why the person who wrote it has deep connections to Ripple going back to 2018, you'll understand why XRP's role in the next financial system isn't speculation anymore. It's being written into the policy frameworks of the institutions that govern global finance. But here's the part the IMF got wrong. And the part they got wrong is actually the most bullish signal for XRP in the entire document. Let me explain. Brad Garlinghouse was just asked about tokenization. His response was precise. The first poster child of tokenization is stablecoins. $19 trillion in stablecoin transactions in 2024. $33 trillion in 2025, 75% growth, and that growth is going to continue. But Garlinghouse made a deeper point that most people missed. He said Ripple focuses on building bridges between traditional finance and decentralized finance, not replacing one with the other, building the bridges between them. And then he referenced something Ben Bernanke, the former Federal Reserve chairman, said at a Ripple event years ago. Governments will roll tanks into the street before giving up control of monetary supply. That stuck with Garlinghouse because it defines the reality that XRP operates in. Governments aren't going away. Fiat currencies aren't going away. What's happening is that the infrastructure those currencies operate on is being rebuilt. And XRP is the bridge asset that connects the old system to the new one. This is not financial advice. I am sharing publicly available information for educational purposes. Always do your own research. Before we dive in, drop IMF in the comments if you've been following the IMF's positioning on tokenization. Drop NEW if this is the first time you're hearing about the connection between the IMF, Tobias Adrian, and Ripple. I want to see how deep this community's research goes. Welcome back. I am the Calm Analyst. Around here, we read the documents that most channels don't even know exist. Today, we're breaking down the IMF's tokenization framework, what it means for XRP, where the IMF got it right, where they got it critically wrong, and why that mistake is actually the biggest bull case for a neutral bridge currency. Let's get into it. Let me start with what's happening on the XRP ledger right now, because the numbers are staggering and most people haven't caught up. Tokenized value on the XRP ledger went from $1 billion on January 1st to over $2 billion as of March 30th. That's a doubling in 90 days. And over the course of 2025, tokenized assets on the ledger surged over 2,200%. US Treasuries form a significant chunk. Stablecoins are pushing the figure higher, and analysts tracking the trajectory project low single-digit billions by late 2026 if momentum holds. This isn't hypothetical. These are live tokenized assets on the ledger right now. Real-world value being represented as programmable digital tokens, settling 24/7, 365, instant, automated, on infrastructure that costs fractions of a penny per transaction. And the biggest players in global finance are diving in. BlackRock is hiring a managing director of digital assets in New York. The role? Lead crypto, stablecoin, and tokenization strategy across the firm. Compensation: $270,000 to $350,000 base plus bonuses. Wall Street isn't flirting with crypto anymore. They're building dedicated teams to execute at scale. Securitize announced on March 24th that they signed a memorandum of understanding with the New York Stock Exchange to support the development of tokenized securities markets. Securitize is backed by BlackRock and Morgan Stanley, and Securitize works closely with Ripple to make sure any tokenized asset integrates well with RLUSD for on-chain liquidity. That's Securitize's own words. Ripple invested in Securitize back in 2019. The connections are deep, and they're operational. If the scale of what's being built here just registered, BlackRock, NYSE, Securitize, Ripple, all converging on the same tokenization infrastructure, smash that like button. This is the analysis that connects the institutional dots most channels don't even cover. Now let me get into the IMF document, because this is where the policy framework meets the XRP thesis. The IMF released a document titled Tokenized Finance, authored by Tobias Adrian. For anyone who doesn't know, Tobias Adrian is the financial counselor and director of the Monetary and Capital Markets Department at the IMF, and he has deep connections to the XRP ecosystem. Going all the way back to 2018, Adrian put a spotlight on Ripple and what they were building. Ripple was selected to serve on the IMF's high-level advisory group on fintech, the same group that Adrian was closely involved with. So the person writing the IMF's tokenization framework is not unfamiliar with Ripple. He knows the technology. He knows the company. He knows the XRP Ledger. The document's main thesis is that tokenization is not just an upgrade to finance, it's a complete structural shift in how the financial system works. Trust, settlement, liquidity, and risk all change fundamentally. Here's what the document says tokenization actually does. It turns assets into programmable digital tokens on shared ledgers. It enables instant atomic settlement, 24/7 markets, automated execution via smart contracts. It replaces traditional intermediaries and processes with code and infrastructure. The old system, trust equals banks and intermediaries. Settlement equals slow and batch-based. The new system, trust equals code and shared ledgers. Settlement equals instant and continuous. The IMF is confirming that tokenization is the new financial system. Not might be, is. They're writing the policy framework for a world where payments, trading, custody, and settlement all merge into one system, where liquidity becomes real-time, where loans, collateral, and assets become programmable. And they outline the risks. Speed risk. Crises happen faster with less time to react. Code risk. Bugs or bad data triggering cascading failures. Concentration risk. Few platforms becoming systemically critical. Fragmentation. Multiple blockchains splitting liquidity. Stablecoin risk. Potential for bank-run-like events. Cross-border chaos. Unclear legal control and jurisdiction. These risks are real. And the IMF's proposed solutions are where this gets extremely interesting for XRP. Comment below. Have you read the IMF document? Type "read it" if you've gone through it. Type "summary" if you want us to do a deeper breakdown in a future video. I want to know how many people in this community are actually reading the source documents. Now here's where the IMF got it wrong. And this is the part that should fire up every XRP holder. The IMF calls for synthetic CBDCs, stablecoins issued by private institutions but backed by central bank reserves. Their concern is liquidity fragmentation. Too many stablecoins, too many chains, split liquidity everywhere. And their solution is that central banks would provide liquidity for each stablecoin pair. But think about what that actually requires. If you have 20 central banks, you would need 190 bilateral liquidity pools. That's a squared problem. Every central bank needs a direct agreement with every other central bank. Do you really believe that in a world of declining bilateral trust, all 20 major central banks are going to come to 190 separate liquidity agreements? The IMF fails to classify the settlement asset problem. They describe the fragmentation, they describe the risk, but they don't identify the solution that eliminates the squared problem entirely. And the solution is obvious to anyone who's been paying attention. You don't need 190 liquidity pools if you have a neutral bridge asset that aggregates demand with zero bilateral agreements needed. Every currency converts to the bridge asset. The bridge asset converts to the destination currency. One asset, one ledger. Settlement in seconds. No bilateral agreements required. That is XRP's thesis in a single paragraph. And the IMF document, by describing the problem without identifying this solution, actually validates the need for exactly what XRP provides. The XRP Ledger has already solved the compliance concerns the IMF raises. XLS 80 and XLS 81, the permission domains and DEX amendments, enable full KYC and AML-compliant trading, lending, and more on-chain. The IMF's preference for permissioned blockchains over permissionless ones is based on the need for compliance. But the XRP Ledger now offers both. Permissioned domains for institutional compliance sitting on top of a permissionless public ledger, the best of both worlds. This is what Garlinghouse means when he talks about building bridges. Not tearing down the old system, not forcing central banks to give up control. Building the infrastructure that lets the old system and the new system coexist, with XRP as the neutral bridge connecting them. Now let me connect this to what's happening with Ripple's ecosystem right now, because the theoretical framework and the operational reality are converging. RLUSD is at $1.56 billion in market cap, being used as collateral in BlackRock's BITL tokenized fund through Securitize, piloting trade finance settlement in Singapore's MAS Bloom sandbox, proposed for Federal Reserve account integration in congressional testimony. The XRP Ledger has over $2 billion in tokenized real-world assets, growing at a pace that went from mid-8 figures to mid-9 figures to billions in just over a year. Securitize is working with the NYSE on tokenized securities markets and integrating directly with Ripple for on-chain liquidity through RLUSD. BlackRock is building a dedicated digital assets team. Nasdaq is targeting Q3 2026 for tokenized stock rollout. The DTCC has a 3-year tokenization pilot active, and Ripple Prime is in their participant directory. Ripple was selected for the IMF's FinTech Advisory Group. The SEC classified XRP as a commodity. The Clarity Act is advancing. 7 ETFs are live with $1.44 billion in inflows. 300 banks across 45 countries on the network. And the IMF just published a document describing the exact financial system that XRP was designed to operate in, while failing to identify the neutral bridge asset solution that eliminates the fragmentation problem they themselves identified. The thesis isn't theoretical anymore. The IMF is describing the problem, Ripple is building the solution, and the XRP Ledger is the infrastructure connecting them. Subscribe right now, hit the bell, drop a CLO in the comments, because the policy documents being published right now are defining the financial system that will exist for the next 50 years. And understanding how XRP fits into that system is the difference between holding with conviction and holding with hope. We cover these documents every week with the depth they deserve. Now let me bring this all together, because there's a through line from the IMF document to the securitized partnership, to the tokenization growth, to the Clarity Act that most people aren't connecting. The world is moving toward a tokenized financial system. The IMF confirms it. BlackRock is building for it. The NYSE is partnering for it. NASDAQ is launching for it. The DTCC is piloting for it. Congress is legislating for it. And the central problem in that system, liquidity fragmentation across hundreds of currencies and stablecoins, has one elegant solution. A neutral bridge asset that settles in seconds, costs fractions of a penny, operates on a ledger with built-in compliance, and doesn't carry the political weight of any single nation's currency. That is XRP. It has always been XRP. And the institutions that have been studying this for years, from Tobias Adrian at the IMF, to BlackRock, to the DTCC, to the 300 banks on Ripple's network, they already know it. The only variable left is the Clarity Act, the legislative key that turns institutional knowledge into institutional deployment. And that key is being cut right now in Washington. Price is a distraction. Value is the reality. Structure is what matters. And the structure being described by the IMF, being built by Ripple, being integrated by BlackRock and Securitize and the NYSE, and being legislated by Congress, is the most comprehensive validation of the XRP thesis in the history of this asset. In a market fueled by emotion and noise, we thrive on data and composure. Remember, haste leads to loss, while calm analysis leads to victory. If you made it to the end, you now understand the IMF framework, the fragmentation problem, the neutral bridge solution, and how every major institution is converging on the same infrastructure. Comment, "Calm analyst," below. Let me see who reads the source documents. And share this with someone who thinks XRP is just another cryptocurrency. Send them this breakdown. Let the IMF explain why the world needs a neutral bridge asset. And let the data show them that XRP is already being built into that role. Like, subscribe, notifications on. I'll see you in the next one. Stay patient, stay rational. And as we always do, we don't wait for the future. We plan for it. Peace.